Muito obrigado, Verônica.
Thank you very much, Veronica.
Duas coisinhas antes da gente dar prosseguimento. A gente
I have 2
deixou
points
aí a pedido da
before we
uma
continue.
pesquisa de satisfação em cada cadeira.
We left
Até
a
antes do
satisfaction
almoço,
survey for
seria
you
legal
at
preencher
each
pra
chair.
deixar aqui no,
Please fill them out
no
before lunch
pessoal
and
que
leave
tá na
them
saída. E a outra, nas
with
pastas que
the
foram entregues,
receptionists.
a gente colocou um cartão de perguntas.
In your folders, we
E
also
depois
included a
desse
question
painel
sheet.
com o Maurício
So
e
after the
com
panel,
o Grégio, vai ter
Mauricio
debate com
and
os clientes que
Grégio
vieram
will
aqui.
talk
alguém
to the
tiver
clients
perguntas,
that came
vai
here.
ter,
So if you
uma
have
sessão
any
aberta,
questions to
perguntas,
ask,
de quem tá na plateia,
or
então
have
pode ir
an
preenchendo
open,
e
we will
que a
have an
gente faz
open
as
Q&A
perguntas
session.
pros
So
clientes.
write your questions down,
Então,
and
queria
we
chamar
will
aqui
ask
da
our
AgroConsult,
panelists.
o Maurício Palma Nogueira.
From
Maurício é
AgroConsult,
engenheiro
I would
agrônomo,
like to
pós-graduado em
invite
administração
Maurício
rural.
Nogueira, who is
Nogueira
an
é consultor
agronomist
desde 98 e acompanha empresas
with
com
a
análise de
graduation
cenários e
in
resultados
farm
econômicos nas cadeias
management.
produtivas
He
de
is a
corte e de
consultant
leite.
since
Nogueira
2008,
planejou
and
a
he
metodologia e
analyzes
coordena
scenarios
o
and
Rally da
economical
Pecuária,
results for
conhecem,
beef and
é
dairy
autor e coautor de 6
cattle.
livros, com publicação de outros 24 capítulos em 21
He's the
publicações
co-author
direcionadas
of
ao
6
setor e
books
elaborou mais de 800
and
artigos sobre
other
economia,
24
tecnologia
chapters
e mercado no agronegócio.
books
Obrigado,
for the sector. He has
Obrigado,
published many
Obrigado, doutor
articles.
Delfino,
Thank you,
pela
Maurício.
oportunidade
Thank you,
de vir
Fábio.
aqui falar pouquinho do nosso trabalho, né?
I'm really
A gente
thankful
acompanha muito
for
cenário,
being
muita
invited
informação econômica,
to this
muito
conference
resultado das
and to talk
empresas,
about
né,
my
de
work.
pecuária,
We see a
principalmente
lot
corte
of
e leite,
economic
mais corte hoje do que
information
leite.
and scenarios
Em
and
parte, eu vou
learn
apresentar pouquinho da nossa
especially
visão do que a gente
in the
espera
beef
ver
cattle
com
and
relação
dairy
à
cattle, in
evolução
particular beef
tecnológica da
cattle.
pecuária, que foi
So
comentado,
I will be presenting
começo
about
pelo
my
Dr.
perspective on the
Dorival,
technological development in cattle raising.
Uma coisa que a
One
gente
thing
sempre
that we
coloca
always say before we
antes de começar
start
uma apresentação
is
de
to
pecuária é situar onde a
contextualize
gente
where
tá na
we
evolução
are in
histórica da
the
produção de
historical
bovinos no Brasil.
evolution
A pecuária de
of
corte,
bovine production
principalmente a
in
pecuária de corte,
Brazil.
mas a pecuária de leite também, ela
Production
paga um passivo
animals
muito
mainly,
caro
but
na
also
sociedade
dairy
em relação
animals
a
pays a very expensive
a
asset in
questões
our
ambientais, né? A
society
pecuária
in
é tida
relation
como
to
uma atividade que
environmental
desmatou.
issues. Cattle
Na
raising is
verdade,
considered the activity
realmente,
that
né, tudo que nós
deforested Brazil.
desmatamos no Brasil
And
foi
actually,
feito
it is
primeiro
true,
com
everything
pecuária,
we
mas não
deforested
foi
in
para
Brazil
produzir
was
pecuária.
first
Na
done
verdade,
with
a gente
cattle
queria
breeding,
avançar
but it
sobre essas
wasn't
áreas
with the
e a única
intention of
atividade viável era a
producing
pecuária.
livestock.
Como é que você prova
Actually,
isso? Com a
people
relação de
wanted to
troca
take over these
entre
areas, and the
bezerros
only
e
viable
bois,
activity
né?
was
Durante
cattle breeding.
50 anos,
How do you prove
durante
that?
40 anos,
With
nós
the
tivemos
exchange
boi
relation
comprando em
between
média 4
calf
bezerros,
and
né?
oxes. During
Então, o
54
preço do
years,
quilo
we
do
had
bezerro
one ox
produzido, que é mais
buying an
caro
average of
produzir pelo custo,
4
né? Um quilo de
calves.
bezerro é mais
So the
caro de
price of
produzir
the
do que um quilo de
kilo
boi.
of the
Ele
calf,
era
which is more
desvalorizado em
expensive to
relação ao boi, o
produce
que
because of the
explica 40
cost,
anos de
it
defasagem,
was
né? O que explica um
devaluated in
desequilíbrio
relation to
desse,
the
que a
ox,
gente
what
importava carne
explains 4
bovina
years of
sobrando bezerro no
deficit.
mercado.
We
Significa que o
imported
bezerro era
beef
subproduto
when
de uma
we
operação
had
imobiliária.
a
Doía,
lot of
ocupava,
cattle.
e a única
It
produção que
means
tinha
that
era
the calf
bezerro.
was
Então
a
é interessante que a
subproduct
gente
of
vem
a
mudando toda a cara da
real
produção
estate
brasileira. Em
investment.
94 a gente consegue
In
finalmente
1994,
controlar
we could
aquela
finally
inflação
control
altíssima.
our
A
inflation.
produção deixa
The
de ser
production
estocagem, né? Deixa de ser
was
especulação.
not speculation
passa a exigir
anymore
mais
and
produtividade. E aí a
starts
gente
to
começa a ver
demand
toda
more
a mudança
productivity, and then
na
we start
pecuária
to
de
see
corte, principalmente.
all of the
A relação de
change
troca vai
in
diminuindo,
beef
quer dizer, um boi passa a
production.
comprar cada vez
The
menos
relation
bezerros,
of
e isso
exchange
chega ao ponto
starts to
de 2020
diminish,
ficar abaixo
and this
de 2.
gets to the
Então,
point
boi
to the
hoje,
point
um
of
ano, compra menos de 2
2015
bezerros.
being
E há
below
5, 6 anos atrás, o
2.
pecuarista falava que se chegasse
So
nesse
an
nível, ele
ox
quebraria.
today
Não quebrou,
buys
né?
less than
Na
2
verdade, ele continua
calves.
dando fôlego à compra de
So
bezerros.
5,
Por
6
quê?
years ago,
Porque ele tem que
the
fazer
cattle
tecnologia
breeder
nesse
would
bezerro.
say they would
Então,
break
comprei
if
um
that
bezerro
happens,
caro.
and it
Para
didn't
conseguir
happen.
fazer com que esse bezerro
And
me dê lucro,
today they
eu
have
tenho
to
que
be
terminar ele mais
technological
cedo.
with
Eu
the
tenho que colocar
calf.
mais de um bezerro por área.
So if
Eu
I
tenho que
bought
terminar
an
ele com uma carcaça
expensive
maior,
calf,
né? E tudo isso
I have
exige
to
nutrição,
finish
genética,
I have to finish it
sanidade,
earlier.
né?
I
E do
have
outro
to
lado, eu
finish
estimulo todo
it with a
criador.
larger
Ele
carcass,
para não
and
olhar
all
pra
of
vaca
these
dele de uma
demands
forma,
nutrition,
desconfiada.
genetics,
Essa vaca nunca vai me dar
sanity,
dinheiro,
and
então não
I
vou investir muito em
stimulate the
tecnologia, né?
breeder.
Agora ele vê que
He
ele pode ganhar
stops
dinheiro com o bezerro
looking at
valorizado e
the
aplica a tecnologia
cow
também. Então nós
with
temos
a
essa força da relação
suspicion.
de troca
Now he sees least he can get money with a valued calf. So we have this strength of the exchange relation pressuring the breeding and the fattening. So it's very interesting to see this moment, this change of technology in livestock. We have seen throughout the last 40 years decline in the margin of producers. We follow this through studies. So in the 70s, you would sell an ox, and 50% of it was profit. And from this ox, you would replace it with one calf, and you would basically double your herd. You would grow, and you would grow a lot. That's why breeding and fattening, when I studied in the 90s, people would say that breeding was for fools. People who would buy calves would always win more. So we had a declining margin, so that in practical terms means that the producer is not getting as much. So how do you react to that? With a lot of productivity. That is good for production animals and dairy animals. Dairy animals, it's very difficult to separate them, but we estimate that 40% of the males that are born and that are going to be used as production animals. It's interesting that IBG data points out that we have about 20 million cows in lactation phases every year. Of these 22 million cows, only 7.5 million are dairy cattle. The rest are all production animals. So this influences all of the production, all of the producers that are highly technified. He suffers the influence of people who are producing milk without technology. Another influence that livestock breeding has and is in the interest of Ouro Fino is the area of poultry and swine. So they integrated the chain. They had the compliance with everything that they need. It is very professionalized now. When I studied, the teacher would say that the consumption of poultry would be the same as beef, and it has gone over. Currently, we will eat 43 kilos of poultry and 38 kilos of beef, and it happened because of technology. In retailing, the beef declined 40% from the 70s up to today, and poultry declined 70% for the consumer, and it is more accessible, and it will eat up a little bit of the market for beef. The good news for the health of animal sector that works quantities of animals to be treated is that the herd is growing again. It declined and it's growing again. These numbers are from IBGE. We always update these numbers, but because we have no conditions to count, we work with the numbers from IBGE. IBGE released that in 2014 we have had 213 million animals, a different number from the ministry. It's difficult to believe this number because how do I have 213 million and I didn't have any animals to slaughter in 2015? So I cannot have that stock of the herd. And if they are right, we will close 2015 near 213 220 million animals. So let's see how we are going to treat the numbers from IBGE in 2014. But the herd is growing from 2015. We were hoping this happened in 2016, but it happened in 2015. We had a retention of matrices that was very high and an index of reproductivity, and we shall have more calves next year. In Brazil, currently, we will slaughter around 39 million animals, so it is under 40 million. It will increase next year, and the major part of the slaughter is in females. So in the first semester, we have reduced the slaughter of females. We imagine that at the end of October until December, we have a greater participation of the animals that were treated with more technology. The semen that is used in Mato Grosso, that they are using pasture plus feed plus confinement, so it's a lot of technology. So news and pressure in livestock breeding is sustainability. These information are being treated a bit amateurly by our sector. We are creating a passive that does not exist. We are admitting that we need to correct problems that we do not have in reality anymore. So when you start to make the diagnosis, images of satellites, the liability of livestock is much smaller than what we are admitting. In Amazon, we have already reforested 20 million hectares. We are already operating with zero deforesting. And today, everything you do, you will need a license to do it. For instance, Brad Pitt is in a campaign for people not to eat animals produced with antibiotics. Who is Brad Pitt to talk about antibiotics in animal production? But who are we to combat Brad Pitt's image? So it is a problem of communication and not information. There is pressure for the rise in technology use, and there is pressure from the economic area and the environmental area. We also have these studies in average 10 states, 6 levels of technology in livestock. So low technology, it produces only up to 3 arrobas per hectare. High technology, more than 6 arrobas per hectare year, which is equivalent to the technology applied in soy. So it's not absurd. In reality, I may go much further with this, and we find much more productive producers. The level of profit increases as technology increases, and the producer is trying to do that. In the dairy cattle, we will show it a bit differently. In 95, the producer who got money with productivity of 10,000 liters per hectare year, he may have 200 liters a day, but his productivity would be 10,000 per hectare year. For him to maintain the same income, he would have to have increased productivity for around 33,000 liters per hectare year. I experienced this as a producer. Technology increased and pressured, and now we have been going through some years that although the price was very bad this year, it still favored us due to the exchange relation with the concentrated up to July. From August, actually, we started to have a reduction in the margin, and probably due to the expectation, exchange rates, and what is forecast for the soy and corn market, this will be a year that we will have a rise in costs in dairy cattle, mainly for swine and poultry. This will probably due to offer and demand leverage prices. The market is not stimulated, it produces less and the price rises. Fabio commented on what we do, which is the livestock rally. We walk around, talk. This year there were 603 producers interviewed, and we found 12% of them operating in production animals, breeding with more than 18 arrobas per hectare year. Why 18 arrobas per hectare year? I passed from 18 arrobas and I am already competing side by side. I am even better than the production of soy and corn, if you get the average of 10 years. Let's not talk about a fantastic year of soy and compare with livestock, which got out of a bad period up to 2013. So 18% is a level we may compete on. This group, this sample, sold 43% of its production in 2014, totally aligned with what was discussed in all presentations of Ouro Fino. The level of the technological package will rise. Maybe the number of producers working with technology will not, but the ones that do will occupy the gaps of those who don't. So naturally, the number of animals, of herds and termination, dairy production, all in high technology farms. This will be an increasing proportion, what impacts the production, the market of supplies. Not only animal health, but nutrition, fertilizers, which is still not very used in pastures, and agriculture defensives. This graph is a comparison of the captation of milk according to IBGE and CPEA. IBGE takes note of it all. So everyone who sold milk that was bought reports to IBGE, and all of the captation of the year of each period in Brazil. It is interesting that in 2014 over 2013, IBGE informed an increase of 5% in the captation and a decline in the first semester, which is from 2015 in relation to 2014. When I go to CPEA, which is an institute of research here who calls the productive regions and has a criteria to treat this statistically, the captation in the same period increased 145 in 2004 over 2013 and 10%, while IBGE registered a decline in the captation. What do these numbers seem to be saying? The regions that are traditionally dairy regions are coming up in the volume of milk in relation to those that aren't. In parts, we have the sector increasing its technology capacity, that quantity of dairy cows, and we have a stimulation of the owner of a bad cow who sees that its calf is worth a lot. So instead of milking it, he lets and tries to get the cow pregnant. If it is constantly milked, he doesn't feed it because he doesn't have adequate technology. It will have difficulty in getting pregnant and generate a calf in the next year. The market of cows may be influencing. This is very positive for the milk segment. Why? The market of milk always suffers with the amount of producers that have cows and milk them in specific moments. Why does technology interest the industry? This is a profile of costs of production in farms by level of technology. So if you take animal health and say it is very little inside the whole cost of production today, we have an average package of around 9 to 10 reais per bovine. In animal health, in production animals, it falls to 6-7, and in dairy of high technology it will go up to 90 reais that are spent with each animal. As technology increases, this proportion continues, but the technological package increases, and I will show that in a while. And nutrition too, fertilizers and correctives and supplies and the depreciations fall. If I get high technology of poultry and swine, the proportion of the cost of production is similar to this. It changes a little bit in relation to the bovine because bovines are ruminants, while swine and poultry are monogastric. In dairy, the same, and the sanitary program goes even under 1%, although it spends much more. The dairy farm, each dairy cow using technology systems, they use up much more supplies than beef cattle. In the process of intensification today, the average of Brazilian livestock is around 14 reais spent in animal health per hectare. As you increase the technological package, you go to 35, 50, 80, and 100 reais. So those producers that accounted for 40% of the sales of the rally spend more than 80 reais in animal health per hectare. Evidently, you may not improve the technological package without guaranteeing the health of these animals. And the reproduction protocols, although produced by the same companies, they go into the cost of reproduction and not of animal health, also tend to go up as you rise the package of technology. It is not only a protocol to do artificial insemination in fixed time. What is AIFT? I administer a group of hormones and synchronize the heat of the cows instead of using human resources to observe the heat, and I inseminate all of the cows in the same day and gain in the process. I think it is interesting to show, and I have shown this before. The first year we assessed the incidence of AIFT in the livestock relay, how much the producer has matured for raising this number, because he starts to spend more with reproduction than with health. And for you to notice this benefit, you need to be in a better level of management than the average. And the majority of producers are going to AIFT. In relation to scenarios, for us to finish the presentation, in a long term, we may not have doubts in national livestock. It is unlikely for us to see a problem ahead. Everything conspires in favor of the Brazilian livestock, including dairy. In the dairy livestock, our challenges are internal and not external. We have the issues of urbanization, population, growth of the GPD. In the case of China, the slowdown of China in relation to commodities does not involve the food. China is growing and food won't stop. Of course, China slowed down on all kinds of purchases. Of course, they will negotiate soy. Of course, they will negotiate beef. They are much better than us in negotiations and than Brazilian salespeople and the rest of the world. They know how strong they are, but the demand for commodities, for food, did not slow down. Another interesting thing, according to IMF, the GDP of developing countries in 2020 will be 50% higher than the GDP of the same countries in 2014. This reflects in the rise of consumption of protein, so it impacts beef, pork, chicken, milk, dairy, all the derivatives. The demand continues to increase in the world and will increase in Brazil because we are watching a change in social class. The exports of beef, we may see the biggest global players reducing herds so that they go back to exporting. They will have to raise the herd because they already work with a level of technology that is high. Brazil has stock, it has means of raising production without having to raise the herd. What is our risk? India. According to the SDA, India has already surpassed Brazil. We disagree on that because we know the methodology of the SDA transforms twice the kilo of beef in the equivalent to carcass. It's a very technical calculation. I may explain later in more detail. Brazil is still at the front, but India is coming close. So the chance that India surpasses us in short term is big, but ahead Brazil tends to recover because our sanitary status and our productive chain for beef livestock is much better than the Indian. In India, the producer sells cattle in small transportations, so it is very hard to organize a productive chain like that and guarantee quality. India will be our competitor in cheaper markets. Livestock cycle, people always comment that there is a lack of calves, so people start to hold on to the cow, then we have many calves and so on. The cycle movements, they have always been based on analysis of offer. The Brazilian market has been maturing, and now we must calculate the impact of the demand and the speed in which we answer. The more technological I am, the faster my cycles will be. But then something that never happened in the Brazilian livestock will start to happen, and that is the break of the harvest. The more technological is our package, the more exposed to climatic and environmental risks we are. And the movement of a break of harvest will cause the same thing. We know of the livestock cycle because it is important for us to understand what the difference is, since the price will evolve the same way, because the answer to a break in the harvest tends to be faster than the livestock cycle. We are living that this year, so we expected the herd to increase in 2017, 2016, and we are already responding without a lot of damage to our production. Production has fallen, but it didn't fall as much as it would in other years. The market of swine and poultry continues to grow in Brazil, but what is interesting is that the type of meat that will be more demanded all over the world is chicken, then swine and bovine. Among the three, of course, there is fish there too. Inside Brazil, the tendency is for the demand to increase for the export of beef, then swine, and then poultry. Why is that? Because all of the countries want to regionalize production to stimulate their own industry. Russia is a great example. You cannot do this to an ox. And how do I do that with an ox? I will buy calf from one country and take it there. Transportation is expensive. The cost of this calf will end up not allowing me, or I will form a herd of cows to occupy an enormous space and inefficient, because beef livestock is much less efficient than swine and poultry, or I may simply buy grains, take there and make poultry. Easier than swine, which is even easier than bovine. So the tendency is for the countries to try and produce this internally. And Brazil, instead, selling grains, wants to sell protein, the so-called value adding. Who wins this game? It is a market game, so we must be alert for that. The market for milk and dairy in the world tends to grow. Brazil still isn't a player. Actually, we still import. The profile of the imports of milk and derivatives today is different from what it was in the beginning of the decade of 2000. But we are still importers, and that is frustrating for those who work with milk, seeing that we still depend on the external market, that we still have problems, that we have been talking about this for 30 years in the productive chain is frustrating. But this depends on the productive sector. What is the great difference? The high technology producer in Brazil has a technical level that is much higher than beef cattle producer. The technological profile of the farms that are above the average, and these producers are more prepared to compete in a very hostile environment, and the hostility is internal. And as we solve this problem, and in part, the solution of this problem is unproductive people being excluded from the market. Dairy cattle tend to be very strong in the future and occupy a growing international market. In relation to the short term, the price of the milk will go up more than beef. What doesn't mean it will be good, since the cost of dairy is totally connected to bran and mainly energy, which is connected to the corn market. So the cost will also go up, as well as the price. We will continue with a margin that is a little bit like what it was in 2014, 2015. The slaughterhouses in the beef market that are 93% of the Brazilian herd is for beef. It is genetics for the production of cattle. The margins of the slaughterhouses improved a lot in the last months. They were terrible up to July. Actually, a good thermometer of these slaughterhouses is that you didn't see the owners of small slaughterhouses in newspapers, TV, saying that things were bad and needed to improve. They threw the towel. They wanted to be sold or outsourced. They wanted to negotiate, and nobody who wants to negotiate will say bad things. You won't do good business. So the slaughterhouses closed an estimate of 50 plants and so on. It concentrated the market more, so that discussion of concentration you get out of 2015 with a much more concentrated market in the biggest slaughterhouses of Brazil. From August, the margin changed and started to be better for slaughterhouses. Prices of the beef increased more, the ox declined. There was an adjustment of purchase. The slaughterhouses noticed they were trying to buy more oxen than we had. They closed down and slowed down. Rondônia, which was much above, was one of the states where the prices of the ox most went down, and they adjusted the margins. And it is interesting that the exports, when transformed the dollar in reais, the decline of 21% of the billing in dollars up to September represents an increase of 6% in the billing in reais. And according to information from inside the slaughterhouses, of course we do not have it open, and it is difficult to analyze through the balances, but each ox that is exported, it is difficult to know which pieces were exported in order to reassemble an ox, are yielding the highest profit that has been registered in history of Brazilian exports. So they are very well, and this has been giving strength for the price of the ox to go up at the end of the year. Next week, we will probably have oxen of 150 in São Paulo. The market of swine and poultry in the next weeks will pass on to retail, the prices that have already gone up in wholesale. So the expectation for poultry and swine, the expectation of the grain goes up, the more this sector tries to pass the price on or slow down production and readjust prices. So poultry and swine will also contribute to help maintain the price of beef in the near future. The tendency of AGO in calves, we had a retention of females that was big. These females will produce calves that next year shall reduce a little the price through the rise in the offer. Why a little? Because we spent years talking about integration of livestock and agriculture was very good for beef cattle producers, and the agriculture noticed that it is very good for them, for it to. It has a feasibility of entering with more technology than the cattle raiser. So we asked in their harvest rally that is made for agriculture, how many producers do integration? 30% said. and 29% they said intended to do. And they didn't start because the price of the calf was high. So when the calf prices fall, he buys it and he helps maintain it high. So we have the age of the calf that tends to fall, but tends to continue to pressure over time. Something interesting about cows that I think we cannot let it pass, we always think we have to retain cows to raise the production of calves. Actually, we have enough cows to raise a lot the production of calves, but they do not get pregnant. People are not being able to make cows reproduce. So our problem is not a lack of cows, but lack of technology. How do we tackle that? Reproduction, nutrition, sanity, all of the technological package that is available for the producer. In the first semester, we had a leftover of pasture, which helped the process of cow rotation. Why did we have pasture left over? Because it rained in the largest part of the livestock production, and there was a reduction of the herd. There was the farmer and the producer maturing the projects of integration. So there was a leftover in the first semester that contributed for the retention of cows and to increase the amount of animals supplemented with pasture. If you take data from Cindy Rações, you will see that feed sold more this year. The market improved. The demand, even with the scenario of a rise in offer at the end of the year, it continues above the offer. There is a price being pressured to rise, and in 2016, the price will continue to rise for the ox, less than in 2014, of course, and less than in 2015. But the cost of production will rise more. So there will be a pressure on the margin as with the milk, less than in dairy, since the sector of beef cattle is less dependent on concentrates, but the costs rise. And it is very easy to understand this. Few products increased as the dollar increased. The greatest part is contained. So next year, part of this adjustment shall rise and impact the cost of beef cattle ahead. And what if the dollar goes down? Phosphate, which is the highest cost in the composition of mineral salt, is connected to the dollar. Every time this happens, the price does not go down as much as the dollar. It reduces less. People present this as being like a train curve. As the dollar goes up, you have the train being the cost, and the production hasn't capitalized this way. So the margin, even if the dollar goes down, we would have the cost higher in 2016. And the producer is aware, so it doesn't matter what goes on in the economy. The only alternative that the producer has today is to perform technology. This is a thermometer of the talks with producers. The producers here know it was very difficult to talk about technology with the producer. The doubts were about efficiency, and today it is not like that. The doubt today is about how to do it, or how to finance a technological process, how to implement this in my property without risks. In relation to what Orofino Fábio presented about the strategy of acting, something that we are also defending is that the technical knowledge is inside the suppliers. The technicians that have time to study, interact, search for knowledge, to innovate. The greatest part of the traditional consultants do not have conditions to be so updated. So the tendency is that the market acts in partnership with independent consultants, with retailers, or the way it has been doing, we will be more dependent on the technician that works in an industry to define strategies of technology. It is interesting that the producer is more and more familiar with this. He isn't afraid anymore of buying something that is pushed onto to him. Actually, he sees people are committed to a program and not with the sale of one product. This is a sign of maturity of the market. Thank you for your attention.
Obrigado, gente, pela atenção.